Hi, my name is Jason Moore, and I'm 29.
And my name is Lori Ann Moore, and I'm 27.
And we've been married for 3 years, and we had one child by the name of Jaden Moore.
Who's amazing.
Getting started, our love story is that we were just some humble kids at Hampton University. And we were both in the same major, the same class, and that's where we met. And from there, we just started to build chemistry, got to learn more about each other. Her being from New York, I'm from Detroit. And we just really found a lot of commonalities with each other. And then that's when we started to date with each other.
So that was a great explanation. So our love story, a lot of what fueled our love story, especially in the beginning, is our desire to walk with the Lord. Initially, neither one of us had a strong relationship, so I know a lot of what is told to everybody, we kind of did counter to that. We were friends at first, and then both of us desired a deeper relationship with the Lord, so we started walking that out together, which is ironic and cool. So
yeah, and then we started dating. Then I asked her father to date her, to be her boyfriend, and then we started to do that. Had a game plan of really getting engaged in a year from there, and then once a year passed, I proposed to her. Then we were in a distance relationship during this whole time for about 3 to 4 years, and then we eventually got married, and we lived with each other here in Texas. So that's kind of what brought us up here up to this point. So next question. Okay, the greatest and the hardest thing about marriage for me is having a best friend all the time. Now, obviously, that's the greatest thing because you have somebody that's there for you more than anybody else in the whole entire world. The caveat to that is you're around that person all the time, which is the hardest thing. Learning somebody, learning their quirks, learning what they like and their dislikes, learning their routine, and sometimes their ideas, their beliefs go against yours. And I think trying to acclimate and trying to become one with that best friend is the hardest thing because each person is changing every single day. One time you think you learned something about them, it can change next year or even the next day. So I think that is the greatest thing, but it can be the hardest thing about marriage.
Well, I think the greatest and the hardest thing about marriage, I think one of the greatest things is that you have the biggest, it's both. You have the biggest opportunity to live out the one another's with the people. So what the Bible talks about, love one another, bear with one another, all of those stuff. You can do it single and you can do it in marriage. And in marriage, for me, currently my state is being married, and I think that has been difficult because you have a bigger picture of who you are, flawed, and that sometimes could be hard to just accept that and deal with that. But you have the greatest opportunity to become better and more Christ-like after denying yourself. So.
Mm-hmm. You got it?
I think what I wish I would have learned while I was single about marriage is not to romanticize marriage. I think they're both seasons and they're both gifts. Singleness is a gift, marriage is a gift. And I think to treat both of them like that so that I would have spent more time optimizing my singleness and being content where I was and what the season is that God has me in. Because initially it started off, oh man, I wish I want to be married. Then when in marriage it turns out, oh man, I want a kid. Oh man, I want this. So that never ending discontentment continues even outside of marriage. So understanding that your satisfaction and contentment is not found in another person. You're complete by yourself. Christ has made you whole. Another person comes to complement that and enhance that. So,
I think for me, with two things, I wish I would have had a community outside of my wife, and established that being single, having some brothers in Christ that I can run with, those that will fight for me, whether I'm married or single, those that'll help me through difficult times, whether it's on the job or loss of a family member, or having people that are Christ-like centered, and they're there to fight for me. So I need that whether I'm single or I'm married, and it's harder to get the older you get. What I've noticed as an adult and getting older is that people have their people that they want to be attached with. It's harder to find new friends. It's harder to grow with people when they have their own life. They have their own kids and responsibilities and work. So that's one thing I definitely would have did. And then knowing my purpose, I think it's harder to find your purpose when you've got all these other distractions. It's like kids, wife, job, even ministry, all of these things that pull you in different directions, and you're still trying to figure out, okay, God, why do you have me on here? I can do these things. I have the capacity to do these things, but what am I here for? And I think it's a blessing and a gift from God when somebody, rather than married or single, understand what that purpose is. And I think establishing that and knowing that before I got married, because really when you're operating your purpose, marriage isn't a be all end all. It's not a defined destination. It's just an added resource and an added asset, as God calls on every woman that is a helpmeet to complete a job, because God said, Adam is not good. It's not sufficient. He's not good enough to finish the job, so he needed somebody there. But Adam already had an established purpose, and I think that's something that I definitely could have used when I was single. Something I would give advice is to practice being Christ-like, because that's all you do in marriage. That's all it requires. You have to submit to God by submitting to somebody. So you can do this at your job. You can do this at your church. You can do this within your family, submitting to some authoritative figure, and all that means is doing something that you don't want to do. And I think that practicing that prepares you for marriage. And it prepares you to be Christ-like, so you can be an evangelistic tool for other people. So when they see you submit to your boss, instead of cussing them out, they're saying, why would somebody do that? And they say, well, it's because of Christ in me. Let me tell you about him. I think there's practical things you can do to practice being Christ-like. Getting a roommate instead of living alone. You're forced to work with somebody. You're forced to submit to somebody's privacy, because they're there sharing that space with you. I think that's another good way of practicing volunteering, going out in the community and volunteering at church and serving other people, because that's what Christ did. I mean, all of these, there's so many different ways that you can practice being Christ-like and walking that righteous path, because when you are married, it just exacerbates that feeling. Like, if you don't like to submit to your boss, you really are not going to like submitting in marriage. If you're like selfish and you don't look out for your roommate, you're really going to be selfish in marriage. It just amplifies whatever is in you, and it brings that to the forefront. So that would advise anybody that's single to work on those different principles and set up these systematic ways to practice being Christ-like, because once you do it and once you're in the game, you're going to be happy that you did.
And then I would build on that point. I would say there is this book by Francis and Lisa Chan, and it's called Marriage in Light of Eternity. So I see a lot of books out there, and we read tons of marriage books that kind of say, do this, do this, do this,
right.
Be a better spouse, his and her needs, the 5 love languages, and all that stuff is great. But having a bigger perspective to understand that this is temporary. So no matter how much I love Jason on this here and now, it's not going to last. It can't come with me to heaven, doesn't follow me to heaven, but it does prepare me for heaven. So having that eternal perspective on what our relationship is helps me to prepare and think about it. Like all of this stuff, like whether it's conflict, that's momentary affliction, that's preparing me for eternal glory. Like all of these different things that we go through, whether it's with, like, so our son was in the hospital for 8 months and is undergoing over like 15 to 16 surgeries. Today makes 16.
Yeah.
But like understanding that all of this, having a good category to putting suffering. So when we are having conflict that seems irreconcilable, like everybody has irreconcilable differences, but like when you have that, you understand the category to put it in, and it puts a whole different perspective. So that book I highly recommend to any and everybody, because it just puts it in the right perspective. Like all of this, like what is your marriage doing to prepare to prepare each and every one of you guys for eternity. And then two, like, what is your marriage doing? What's the purpose of your marriage? Are y'all getting together to further the kingdom? It's not just about us. If there's a war going on out there, if I'm not sharing the gospel with my neighbors, if I'm not intentional about the people around me, like, what did the Lord bring us together for? Jason touched on it earlier. Like, we have purpose. The Lord didn't just put us on this earth and say, hey, figure it out. I know we all have purpose and we're here to do certain things. And even if you don't fully know, like, the Lord called me to sing on this platform, you know something. You know that there's a lot in the Bible that says love one another, serve one another. You know, there's different little things that you can do to better somebody's day and do different things. So all that stuff, like, what did your marriage do? What is your marriage do for us? Like, this dealing with chronic illness in our son, that has put us on a certain platform to have conversations with certain people that we would have had that conversation with. There were plenty of people that were in the pediatric intensive care unit that we met
like
time and time again, atheists, Hindi, you name it. But we were able to share the love of Christ while there, because what brought us together was suffering. And the gospel is good and great, but people want to know, does that work in times of suffering? And I think that people see that. People see the hope. It is like literally the hope of the Lord that is in you. The joy of the Lord is truly your strength in those moments. And people want to see and know that that's true. And then it opens up opportunities for you to share Christ with them. So all that to say that is that the Lord puts you through things, whether you're going through a bout with adultery or like whatever it is, financial issues in your marriage, like none of this stuff is wasted. I heard a great prayer the other day. One of Jaden's neighbors that was in the PICU, she's about 1.5 years old. She passed away, and I was just having a really difficult time with that, like just dealing with a 1-year-old passing away and what that meant. Just period, knowing that they were next door to my son.
Right there.
That's hard. But just understand that one lady told me, when you don't know what to pray, just pray, make it count. So if you're going through anything in your marriage, in your singleness, whatever it is in life, like sometimes those are good prayers to pray, make it count. And even if you don't take that knowledge just for yourself, it's good to share it. So all I like to say, it's important to know what your marriage, the purpose of your marriage, to share, not just like everybody is tempted in the beginning of marriage to just spend time learning each other and let me just spend time all up under each other. But when we did that in the beginning, it was the biggest sources of conflict and stuff like that, because the Lord didn't design us for that. Like, He didn't design us as selfish beings. He designed us to live in community. He designed us to serve other people outside of ourselves. And I think that encouraged us, that united us and encouraged us and built foundations that's important for our future. So that's my thought of it.
No, that's good. I think premarital counseling, that was something very intentional, something countercultural. A lot of people don't believe in having people in your business. A lot of people don't believe that you need anybody else to say a stamp that says, yeah, approve this marriage. A lot of other times we get together and we say, okay, I feel like I want to get married. You feel like we're going to get married. That's all that's necessary. So I'm glad Lorianne and I did a premarital counseling. And it was very intentional. It was very informative. Learned a lot of different things, Bible knowledge, and learned about things about each other that we didn't know without premarital counseling providing that environment and that systematic way of doing things. So I think that was definitely beneficial. That something we did intentionally.
Okay, and I think that I can't understate that enough. I think that it's important at the end of the day to do premarital counseling. I think it's huge. In addition to what you were saying, I think that it also helps build that bit of accountability that you're going to need to propel you throughout your marriage. I think you establish, especially if you do it with a couple, when people say, oh, I go through premarital counseling, it wasn't that beneficial, I'm like, well, what did you do? What was your effort? What did you put into it? And it really is only good if you work it. So you have an opportunity to build. If it's a one-on-one with a couple, you have the opportunity to build with another couple, to build a relationship that can last well into your marriage, that can well benefit both of you guys. So when you're having conflict in your marriage and you have to put those things to test, you're learning in theory, but then you have people that can hold you accountable, that can, if I need to call Minister Cullen, I'd say, hey, Jason and I had this argument, he's been there, and Mrs. Cullen has been there to have those conversations to bring this back in. So it's an opportunity for some great accountability. And then once you start that, it's building the foundation. So even if you don't finish, so we're in Texas, we're not necessarily in Virginia, there are things we know. Minister Cullen and Mrs. Cullen also suggested that we find community here, so it build the foundation. It helps us when we went into life group and we're getting into other counseling bits, to have that transparency, because we already started that transparency in the beginning of our relationship, and then in the beginning of our marriage it was built on being transparent with one another, sharing with one another. And then for us, I think the biggest thing was to learn how not only to be transparent, but how to do it in love. Like, okay, I can't just blurt out something because I feel like I'm being transparent. I told you how I was feeling. Yeah. But understanding that I have to give an account to the Lord for all of these things that I'm saying. Nothing that is coming out of my mouth, no empty word, is not, I'm not going to have to be given an account for. So just understanding that my words have weight and meaning, and I'm going to have to look at Jesus and be like, okay, I'm sorry about that. I only said that because of this. It's not really going to be that way. It's going to be like, what were you thinking was going through your mind? So understanding that puts a whole weight to how I talk to you and deal with everybody else.
Okay. I think one of the most essential things that you can do when being married is establishing that there is no way out. I think Lorianne and I did that in the beginning. We just kind of resolved and said that there is no back door, there is no escape plan. Divorce is not an option. So that means if somebody dies, if there's an affair, if there's a gambling, if the most extreme situation happens, you don't have a way out. So now what are you going to do? And I think that changes the mindset of how you approach marriage, how you approach biblical counsel, biblical principles. If you know that you're trapped in a room with this person and there is no door, how are you guys going to go the day to day with each other? That means boundaries, that means rules, that means counseling, that means digging into your word, and hopefully, if your spouse doesn't change, then let God change you to adjust to your house or your spouse not changing. I mean, there's a lot of different ways, but I think that is the very first thing, because a lot of people brought in the fact that, there's a honeymoon phase. We didn't experience that. We didn't experience this blissful, delusional, myopic, I only see happiness. That is not what we experienced. Since we met, we've been debating, combative. We've always, and some of the times playful, sometimes it's just two like-minded people clash. Yeah. And so with that, us saying, you know what, I'm not leaving, so what we gonna do? Yeah. That literally changed how we approached a lot of different things. And that's not even to say we didn't leave out the door physically. That wasn't to say that, you know what, I'm done with you. We've said those things and we felt those things. But in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, I made this resolve saying, not only marriage, but I said I'm not going to go. So that always brought us back, at least for me. And then the second thing...
I can give that one.
Okay, yeah.
I think a second thing that I would say is that... I'm going to use a re-engage line to draw a circle around you and handle everybody in it. Like, I think that at the end of the day, you're responsible for your actions, and you need to be following the Lord, like doing what the Lord says, regardless of this person's action. It has no bearing on how you respond and what you do with you. So I think I think you need to chase after the Lord, get in front of His face. If you're having conflict with your spouse, being Christ-like, also includes accountability, getting in community groups, having people around you that can sharpen you, iron sharpening iron. So all of that to say that I think that chasing after Christ, like being focused on you and your flaws and your imperfections, and cleaning the log out of your eye before trying to get to specking anybody else's eye. So I think that's across the board. Those two foundations, like being Christ-like, and then also fixing the things that you have internally that you're dealing with first. Are the foundations, and then establishing that there's no way out. It can be suffocating at times, but that's when you have the opportunity to pray all the more. Because in and of yourself, you can't do marriage. Like, I think the big misconception is like, if I fix this and this and this about my spouse or even myself, right, it's going to be perfect. Right, because at the end of the day, we're all flawed human beings, and like, we're not going to be perfect this side of heaven. So it's a strive to be better. So what new opportunities and arguments do I have to reflect Christ, to love this person better? And then you don't always get the glory here. You're not always going to get the, thank you, baby, here. But you'll get it in eternity. And I think that applies even to singles. fixing you, knowing you, like
Yeah.
what you have, what's going on with you, like really loving Jesus. So if you don't have a relationship with the Lord, if you're not really chasing after him, if you're not really in your word, like those are things that you need to do regardless of relationship status. Like, and because then you find your contentment, your fulfillment, and your satisfaction in Christ. Because it's really only in Christ alone. Like, so that's my biggest thing, and that's the two things that I think help that we implemented randomly.
I think one of the biggest things that gets overlooked is praying together.
Yeah.
I think that it kind of conditions you in your heart and your mind and spiritually to God, that when you pray together, because I think it makes a big difference. Even statistically, they say those that pray together are more likely to last longer than those that don't pray together. And there's some truth to that. Where, I mean, I'm not saying just because you pray that guarantees it, but it does make a difference. And I see the difference in our day to day when we pray together in the morning versus we don't. Maybe you're more irritable. Maybe you have more of an attitude, more flippant with your words. I mean, I think also incorporating that prayer is something that we've always done. And when tragedy hits, when she brought up our son Jaden, we prayed over him every day. And it really pressed in because of suffering. Seeing him have all these surgeries, doctors saying he might not make it, and then he makes it. I think that it was easy for us to pray in that situation. But now that he's home and he's getting treatments and he's getting better, you have that temptation not to pray diligently because we're not in that agony and that mindset. But you see the difference, and I've seen the difference in Lorianne. Whether she prays or not, I see the difference in myself, whether I pray or not. And so I know that makes a difference within a marriage.
Yeah. And then at the end of the day, love Jesus. That's it. Everything else will follow.
And pray.
I wasn't one of them.
And pray.